Yeah, I was meant to say in the last one, last blah 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 that I had. What was always very exciting was if you when we put out that first EP or any single that you used to put out, be a 7-inch single, to get a review in a magazine, that was like, oh man, we've got a review in Roadrunner. And in fact, my favourite pages in the book is that whole page where all the singles are reviewed of the month or the week, and it's so great because it's of the time. So getting a review, getting a live review was very important. And
I think getting a bad review was actually just as good, because then you can tell them, fuck off. We actually have the goods, and a bad review just spurred you on to make your next single better.
I saw a review, it wasn't in Roadrunner, somebody else had this review, and it was of our first album, and the opening line of paragraph of the review was, well, this is the most boring and worst album cover I've ever seen in my entire life. And I went, yes!
Actually, talking of reviews, Donald, I'm going to throw one back at you here, which was a review that you did of the Wild and Reckless single. I don't know whether anyone remembers Wild and Reckless, do they? Is Richard Wilkins here, by the way? Yeah.
I don't think he made it.
No, Donald did them a big favour. Donald wrote this about their record. These guys are supporting Black Sabbath on their upcoming tour. They'll probably get eaten alive on the first date. Tremendously inane lyrics backed by chirpy chirp keyboards about as wild and as a drizzly morning in Melbourne. And that was Richard's last record. Actually, there's some...
Stand by every word.
This next one's got a little exclamation from the Ed as well. It's actually, it's got question mark, question mark, question mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, and then a dash, and then Ed. And it follows a comment by, I don't know whether I'll name this journalist, but she was quite right in the end. She said, the boys next door are just brimming with style, vivacity and cleverness. Okay, so far. Then, they could just be the most exciting thing since the Beatles filmed A Hard Day's Night. She may have proved right, but it was a strange comparison, I thought, at the time. Anyway, one of the things about Roadrunner, and a lot about what we were doing in the media and the music community at the time, was exercising our Australianness or our independence. And one of the things that Donald has said, and Roadrunner certainly championed it, was about all the material was generated by Australians, by Australian writers. They didn't take articles from overseas magazines, and if we were going to write a piece about Blondie or about Talking Heads or something like that, it was an Australian person who wrote it. Kerry Phillips is here tonight. She was writing from New York. But it was all based here in Australia. I think that was actually a very important part of the magazine's success, the fact that it was all sourced in Australia. And I think we took on board the DIY thing about punk big time here in Australia. We thought we could do it, we did do it, and it wasn't just musicians, our filmmakers, the new radio stations, magazines, everyone was trying to make it go on our own terms, So Donald, how important do you think this was to Roadrunner's differentiation with the other magazines around, that it was all created by Australian journalists?
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, look, I think it was very important, and I made a virtue of it because we actually we had a couple of articles contributed by an English journalist called Chris Salovich, who used to write for New Musical Express in the UK. Now, Chris's material would appear in RAM quite regularly because RAM had a syndication deal with the publishers of New Music Express in the UK, email. And I think they also had syndication rights to Melody Maker. But Chris submitted those articles that we ran. I think it was a couple of pieces on Clash, one on Malcolm McLaren, there's been a couple of others as well. But he submitted those directly to us because his, let me get this right, his wife was the sister of Michael Manos, who was married to Moira Manos, who is now Moira Bennett, who many of you may know, who set up Virgin Records. Versa Manos. So Chris was married to Versa. So he came out to Australia, he came out to Adelaide. I had him on the 5MMM community radio show that I did. So Chris sent us stuff, and people wrote to the magazine and said, oh, well, you know, how can you say you only running original stuff when you've got this stuff from Chris Sullivan's? That was the reason that his material ran. But Mark, you mentioned Kerry Phillips, who wrote a fantastic column from New York in the later period of the magazine, and that was just, you know, fantastic coverage of what was happening there, and if Australian bands went there. I recall Split Ends going there, and Kerry wrote about the reception they got in New York. In London, we had a succession of writers. Probably the main one was a guy called Keith Shadwick, an Australian saxophone player. He played in the High Rise Bombers with Paul Kelly and Martin Armature. Played before that in a band called Uncle Bob's Band. He went over to the UK, to London in mid-78, Roadrunner's first London editor, and he contributed some great material, including an interview that's in the book with John Lydon, Johnny Rotten, where he basically went over to John Lydon's house with a carton of beer, and they sat down and watched television all night and drank the beer. He turned the tape recorder on, and the interview that came back was basically a sort of a rave with John Lydon. And there were so many swear words in that interview that the printer, we used to get printed up in Murray Bridge outside Adelaide, the printer noticed all the F words and C words and the other words, and the printer took it to his boss and said, "Boss, we can't print this stuff." So the boss told Adrian, the printer, to white out all the swear words. And if you look in the book, he did miss a few. But, you know, that kind of, the Australianness, we very much, I think, Australia, Roadrunner, I think, gave the Australian view on music. Even if it was overseas bands, like Keith and others in London, Kerry in New York, it was always from an Australian point of view. And within Australia, I certainly tried to cover the whole country. So Michael and others in Perth, we had Scott Matheson in Brisbane, we had a bunch of people in Adelaide, we had Stuart Coop, Stuart Matchett, Peter Nelson is here tonight in Sydney, we had Adrian Ryan and Clinton Walker and Bruce Milne in Melbourne, and I think we even had a Darwin column in one issue. I can't remember who actually wrote that, but we were very much, I think being in Adelaide, you did get probably more of a national perspective than if you were in Sydney or Melbourne. In Sydney, pretty much be dominated by the view, you know, through the lens of Sydney, and Melbourne the same. But in Adelaide, because the scene was so small, you kind of got a balance of Sydney and Melbourne, but also included the rest of the country. So I think Roadrunner was a very Australian magazine. Yeah.
Well, my comment would be that the scene dictated that people wanted to know about these bands, and they wanted to know about Australian bands, and they wanted to know what Australians thought of some of the other bands. So me going to the Talking Heads press conference with Ross, you know, that was because Ross wanted to find out about the Talking Heads, to write about it in your magazine. And I think that's what, if you look at today's Australianness on Australian radio, I think it's mandated that Australian radio has to have 80% of overseas stuff. You know, that's what it says. It has to be 80% overseas. I think at the time there was probably 60% of the radio was Australian.
One of the things that John Bowler wrote his reference in the book, not about his band in particular, but it was about the opportunity that the magazine gave to newer punk and new wave bands and gave them a chance to rub shoulders with the more established bands. I think personally that was one of the real pluses of Roadrunner.